Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are talking about why we need teachers. In this episode, Robert and I are going to talk about the need to have teachers and the call that some feel to be a teacher. And we'll also be talking about some of the qualities of being a teacher that the course highlights, qualities to look for in a teacher, and qualities to cultivate within yourself if you want to become a teacher. Robert and I wanted to cover this today because here at the Circle, we're launching a new program called the Miracle Ministry Academy. It's a 6-month training for anyone who wants to make A Course in Miracles a full-time career through teaching or through healing, coaching, chaplaincy, therapy, being a spiritual director, or working on the administrative side of a course-based business. There are many, many different ways to do this work. And we're offering the Miracle Ministry Academy because A Course in Miracles has so much to give the world, but it won't be able to do that until and unless there is a chorus of voices around the world in a variety of different professions who are giving their lives and their careers to sharing this path. And so if you want to learn more about the Miracle Ministry Academy, you can visit circleofa.org/MMA. And as of this recording, applications are being accepted until September 1st of 2024. We're only taking 20 people in the program because we want to have enough time to devote to every individual member. And although we announced the Academy just a few days ago, we already have 19 applications. So if you want to join, it's best not to wait to submit yours. And you can do that at circleofa.org/MMA. Robert, before we move into the content of the recording today, is there anything that you want to say on this topic or the Academy?
In terms of the academy, it's a really big deal for us. We haven't done something like this before. And, the course community, from our standpoint, needs new voices. There have been organizations that have been around for a long time, teachers who've been around for a long time, but we're not seeing a lot of new teachers. And so it's so important to inject that new blood into the teaching stream in the course community.
Agreed. So, just zooming out to the big picture here, it is so obvious that we rely heavily on teachers. We need people who are committed to acquiring knowledge and wisdom and experience themselves, and then sharing what they know for the benefit of others. And it's interesting, though, because while we love teachers in other areas, if you teach kids in a school system, for example, you're viewed as a hero, which you absolutely are. But if you're a spiritual teacher, that is sometimes viewed with suspicion. And it's not just the assumption that you're in it for egoic reasons. That's certainly part of it. But there's also this desire in us to not have someone put in a place of authority over us. In the course community, this manifests by us saying that there are no teachers because we're all teachers and students of each other. Some study groups we've noticed will proudly say they have no leader. And in addition to that, as we say so often around here, one of the very first things that you hear as someone being introduced to the course is that it's a self-study program, even though the course never calls itself self-study and has a manual for teachers. The list goes on. But the role of teacher and the role of student are deeply valued in the course to a remarkable degree. And so to see that, we'll begin with a quote from the course that Robert will read to us.
This quote really says it all. It's from chapter 3 in the text in the CE, and it says, "The role of a teacher properly conceived, is one of leading himself and others out of the desert, meaning the desert of the world, of the ego's system. Then he says, the value of this role can hardly be underestimated, if only because it was one to which I very gladly dedicated my own life. What I think is so important about that passage is it really addresses how much at times we want to undervalue that role. So if we're tempted to underestimate the importance of the role of teacher, we can remember, well, hey, that's a role that Jesus, quote unquote, very gladly dedicated his own life to. Why would he dedicate, if he is who we think he is, why would he dedicate his life and do so gladly to a role that is suspect, insignificant, etc.?
I also like that first part of the passage where it says the role of the teacher is to lead himself or herself and others out of the desert. And this is key because the course repeatedly says that you can't give what you don't have. And so you have to, in some measure, be out of the desert yourself in order to be a teacher. And as a student, this is obviously one of the things that you should be looking for in a teacher. So I want to talk a little bit about what that means. What does it mean from a course perspective to be out of the desert? And how can we recognize that in ourselves and in other people?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think that there are markers in the course for recognizing basically spiritual progress where we're getting freer of the ego. One is that we are less at the mercy emotionally of all that's happening. We feel less fear. We have more peace. Another one, though, is how how our relationships are, how we treat other people, how we conduct ourselves in relationship. I think that's a whole other measure. And I think a lot of people who feel that they're very peaceful and maybe awakened don't do so well when it comes to their relationships. So I think we should be looking for both, sort of the inner side of it, of the role, as well as the relational side, um, in terms of markers for someone who's getting out of the desert and and looking at ourselves to see if we're getting out of the desert.
Yeah, we talk here so often about this idea that as spiritual students and even as spiritual teachers, there's this value that's placed on heightened spiritual experience. And that's an incredibly powerful and valuable thing. But if you come out of that experience and your ego is just as intact as it's always been, if your relationships are just as damaged and broken as they've always been, then that's a clue, both for yourself and for those who are looking to you as a teacher, that something is amiss.
Yeah. Yeah. So you really want someone who's getting free of the ego in the fullest sense of the term ego, right? Ego is not just, something that limits my spiritual awareness. It's something that messes with and limits all my relationships.
I love this idea that being a teacher is what Jesus very gladly dedicated his own life to. And in the course, he also says, my devotion to my brothers has placed me in charge of the sonship. And so it's his devotion to us that has got him promoted in a sense. And there's a model in that for us as teachers and as students that it's really about from a teacher's perspective, it's about devotion to the student. So can you say more about that?
Yes, I did a class not too long ago on devotion in the course. I think that spirituality tends to be so centered on ourselves, our own mind, that we have a kind of ambivalent relationship with devotion. Like we love that, random acts of kindness because random sounds like I can be going along, you know, feeling, in the groove, in the moment, and then here there's some need I respond to with kindness. This is kind of random. But would we have as much attraction to devoted acts of kindness? That seems a little bit more challenging. But there is not just the emphasis on Jesus as a devoted teacher. The course has a whole emphasis on being a devoted teacher, which, as you said, means devoted to your students and devoted to their learning. Um, and what that is contrasted with is being devoted to our egos. And I think a lot of the suspicion around teachers is so often we see teachers who feel like they're devoted to their egos, to their status, their sense of having an important place as teacher, to the power and authority that may come along with that. And Jesus is saying that he needs people who are not devoted to their ego, but who are truly devoted to their students.
Mm. I love that distinction. What are you giving your devotion to? Are you devoted to keeping your ego in place, or are you devoted to the furtherance of the journey of the student? Yeah.
Yeah.
But being a teacher with a puffed up ego is not the only way to be an egocentric teacher in the course. There are two sections in the course that were originally addressed to co-scribe Bill Thetford's fear of teaching a class on abnormal psychology. And these are relevant because his fears tend to mirror our own recoil from accepting the role as teacher. So you can want to be a teacher for egoic reasons, and you can withdraw from being a teacher for egoic reasons. So that's often surprising to people because we tend to think that the withdraw is the humble thing, but the course is saying that's not the case. So talk to us about that idea.
That's such an important point. And that distinction, like you can be an egocentric teacher either way. Because for those of us who feel more of like I'm a little scared of the role, I, would like to just back away and avoid it, we can think, well, my ego doesn't need to be in that role. I don't have that kind of puffed up ego that those teacher people do. Maybe your ego needs to withdraw from that role, and maybe it needs to withdraw from a role to which you have been called. And that was the case with Bill Thetford, like you're saying. So there's these two sections. One's called the fear of teaching toward the end of chapter 3. The other is called the devoted teacher toward the beginning of chapter 4 in the text. And there's a lot of rich teaching in there, really rich teaching, which we don't have time to go into. But the basic idea is Bill had been assigned by Jesus. Jesus said this job of teach. He wasn't normally a classroom teacher, but there was an abnormal psychology class that needed to be taught. Jesus said basically he arranged for Bill to be in that role. And the idea was that Bill was really afraid of it. He was always afraid of public speaking. And there's a particularly memorable spot where it says that he was afraid that if he was a good teacher, that the reactions of the students would make him feel elevated, and now he'd feel separate from them. Okay. And he was afraid that if he wasn't a good teacher, the reactions of the students would drag him down. And now he'd kind of like be on their level, but it would be depressing because he would be a bad teacher. He's supposed to be, not exactly on their level. And so either way, he is giving their view of his image all this power. And he's thinking of the role in relation to what's going to happen to his image based on their reactions to his teaching. And oh my God, can't every teacher identify with that? It's like your image is like this big, like fragile, overblown bag. And whatever they do to that bag is like it happens to you. And so for so many people, you just want to back away.
And there you have the picture of the egoic teacher in the course sense, because it's not about the needs of the students to
Mm.
continue their journey home. It's about what's going to happen to my image. And I love this nuance in the course because it's so easy to think that the egoic teacher is just the one who wants to step into the role for the attention and the glory. But this idea that no, you can back away from teaching, and that is also egoic, is really interesting, because if we dig deep enough with those who don't teach, then that idea is at work as well. And in fact, Jesus says that Bill was meant to teach that class on abnormal psychology because he could teach it without the distortion of the ego, whereas others couldn't. And so I don't know if you want to say more about that,
Oh, I
but
do for
e-
sure. Yeah.
even though, Bill was concerned about being puffed up or depressed, Jesus still saw that he was able to teach it without that distortion. So there's a model in there for all of us too.
The implication, I'll go ahead and say what Jesus said about this, but the implication is that Bill was just afraid he was inadequate. He was not up to the task. That was his main fear. So Jesus begins by pointing out that abnormal psychology, which was the subject of the class, is ego psychology. So mental illness is from the ego, in other words. So abnormal psychology is about mental illness. So Jesus then says that most teachers teach the course on abnormal psychology abnormally, meaning they teach from their egos. And what that does is because they're teaching from their own egos, they're increasing the mental illness in their students. Okay. But then he says, quote, you, Bill, are particularly well suited to perceive the difference between teaching it abnormally or not, and can therefore teach this course as it should be taught. And then he talks about what Bill's assignment is. He says, your teaching assignment, and I assure you it is an assignment, will be to present perceptual distortion, meaning mental illness, without either engaging in it yourself or encouraging your students to do so. So he can teach it from a place outside of the ego's perceptual distortion, its mental illness. Then he says, if you adhere to this goal, you will both engender and experience hope. It means hope to get out of the illness of the ego. He'll engender it in his students, he'll experience it himself. And he says, and you will inspire rather than dispirit the future teachers and therapists which I am entrusting to you. So he would dispirit them by giving them the feeling like there's no escape from the ego's illness. He will inspire them with hope that there is escape. But notice there's this chain. There's the material he's going to teach. There's Bill, who's the teacher. Then there's the future teachers and therapists who are learning from him. And obviously, when Jesus says that, he has in mind the people they themselves will affect. So he's giving Bill this assignment because he can teach the class better than is usually taught without his ego. And then through that, he'll affect those future teachers and therapists. And then they will affect all those people they teach and do therapy with. Very interesting.
It is. And I want to get into that discussion about those that are entrusted to us. But something that you just said really struck me, that if you're teaching from the ego, then you're teaching from a place of mental illness. And then you're just increasing the mental illness in your students. And that's obviously the opposite of what's going to save the world. And so, but if you think about that, like, oh, I can imagine anyone listening who's thinking about being a teacher specifically, hearing that and thinking, oh, well, if I have to clear out all of the illusion of my own mind, then I'm never going to do that. And so, therefore, maybe I shouldn't step into the role of teaching. And I want to talk to you about that idea because what would you say to someone who's thinking, I got a long way to go in my own life before I step into this role, and yet I feel called to do something. So where's the rub there?
It's a good question. Yeah. What I would say is there are some people where you can see that their ego is so bound up in the role that they are just going to be, in essence, spreading their disease. And then there are other people. I mean, Bill was not a perfect person, right? But it was Bill's almost like his lack of investment in the role, you think, that allows him to teach it without ego. And now, even though he's not perfect, you're thinking, well, he's on the other side of some divide where he's going to do a better job than the normal teacher. And so he's needed. You know, Jesus doesn't need perfect people. He just needs people that are going to end up, injecting health rather than spreading their own disease.
And also, isn't there a part of the course where it says that wherever you are, there are students who need you in that place?
Well, that's about therapists and patients, but yeah, that's the principle. There are patients who need you just that way.
Right.
So that's a good point. Yeah.
And
So there are settings where even, somebody who's largely identified with their ego and their ego is identified with the teaching role may be of some value to certain people.
I wanted to kind of flag that because you realize, okay, if I'm not out of the desert to a degree that's at least a step ahead of the people that I'm trying to lead out of the desert, then I'm spreading that mental illness. And you realize that it's an awesome responsibility to be a teacher in whatever form that it takes because you have some role in the psyche of another human being. And as teachers and as students, really, we should take that very seriously. As teachers, you should take it seriously because it's an awesome responsibility. And as students, you should take it seriously because we let in a lot of influence that is, I think, hurting more than helping in the spiritual space.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Agreed.
I want to go back to this idea that Jesus had people that he was sending to Bill. He was entrusting these Bill with the care of these people, and that idea obviously applies to all of us. I mentioned on a podcast that we did recently called "Saying Yes When God Calls" that when you say yes to the call to teach or the call to give your life to higher principles, you're not just saying yes for yourself. You're saying yes to those who God is preparing to send to you because you have a role in their healing. And again, that makes teaching a very beautiful and a very honorable thing that we need more of in this world. And in fact, the course says that God's plan for salvation, meaning God's plan for the healing of the world, what the manual calls the plan of the teachers. This is where the Holy Spirit's call for us to come home is universal. It's going out everywhere all the time, but we don't listen to it. And so we need teachers. That's why the plan of the teachers was established. The role of the teacher in the course is to save time for ourselves and to save time for the student in going home so that everyone gets there faster. And so you can say yes, meaning yes to being a teacher of God for the wrong reasons. And you can say no to being a teacher for the wrong reasons as well. So there are people who are waiting for you to say yes. And if you say no, their journey is impacted.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can I mean, from the course's standpoint, everyone is called to be a teacher in some form. The call is going out to everyone. And the reason it's so important is that most people are kind of stuck in the loop of their own head, and they need someone, another person to come who can help them out of that loop. Anyway, it is significant. I mean, you mentioned the plan of the teachers. The course calls the plan for the salvation of the world the plan of the teachers. That's what's going to save the world. It even says that without God's teachers, there would be no hope of salvation.
And no hope was softened in the original publication, wasn't it?
I think the FIP edition reads little hope, but originally it read the way it's in the CE, where this is the original line: except for God's teachers, there would be no hope of salvation, for the world of sin would be forever, quote unquote, real. There would be nothing to come and break the cycle of the world seeming like a real prison house.
There's a big difference between no hope and little hope. And no hope is that's massive. It
Yeah.
just really puts a pin in how important it is for everyone to accept some, whether you feel called to be a teacher in the formal sense, there needs to be some kind of recognition within all of us that we're called to be a teacher in the informal sense, because to teach is to demonstrate. So the idea is, what are you demonstrating even to those in your own life that you have influence over? It's
Yeah.
a like we can all see ourselves as teaching on some level.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
we'll talk about that.
And so when you accept the role of teacher, it's such a big deal in the course that, as we've been saying, your assigned pupils begin to look for you. And until they come, the course says, quote, at the right time to the right place, and then they meet you. And that's such a really interesting idea. So can you say more about that? That you say yes, there's some mental switch that goes off in the mind of your pupils, or those that you're meant to help on their journey of healing, and then they come to find you. Fascinating. Just can you talk about that?
It is fascinating. And the way the course talks, you have to conclude that on both sides, that it's largely unconscious. So what it says is that you accept the role of being a teacher by making a single deliberate choice in which you don't see someone else's interest as apart from yours. So you just make a choice where you say, oh, their gain is my gain. Their loss is my loss. I'm going to act out of that awareness. You don't realize you just signed the dotted line to be a teacher. And then once you do that, something goes off, as you said, some signal in their minds. And I assume that for the most part, they aren't thinking, well, if I go to this restaurant or this church or I move to this city, I'm actually doing that looking for my teacher. They just feel impelled to do certain things that end up having them land in the same place at the same time as you. But all of it was designed to get teacher and pupil together. It's just fascinating.
You and I had an instance of this. We There's no way to like really know if that's exactly what happened, but do you remember, it was in a class where I was sharing that on Easter Sunday 2017, we got together in your, what you called your little Easter celebration that you were doing for years and years and years alone, where you would read Helen's poem on Easter and read about the resurrection. And then I joined you on that Sunday. And I was just casually telling the story, and someone raised their hand at the end and said, that's the day I decided to give my life to the course, or something like that.
Something
And
like that. Yeah.
and we were just remarking, like, wow, what if, and I suspect that this is happening everywhere all the time in minds all over the universe, but it felt like there might have been something there, that day when we came together, some light went off in her mind, and here she's been a devoted student ever since and is thinking about teaching.
Makes you wonder.
It
Yeah.
does. It does. So the manual also says that, quote, each one, meaning each teacher, saves, and this is a wild line, 1,000 years of time as the world judges it. And the course has a very different view of time. You know, we do our practice periods and we can save thousands of years of time. But just this idea that each teacher can save 1,000 years of time is big. So, is there anything that you want to say about that idea?
Yeah, I don't think that's talking about the teacher saving time personally. I think that's talking about the teacher taking 1,000 years off of the journey of the
Journey of this,
world to heaven, the world,
the world, not the student, the world.
not the student. That's how it reads. So
Well,
imagine, I mean, the world's going to be going on for a long time. Let's face it, right? We're not going to all ascend tomorrow or a million years from now. I think it's going to be a very, very, very long time. Um, and so, in that long journey, each person who takes up their role as a teacher takes 1,000 years off that overall journey. I mean, I don't know how that's even possible, but that's what it says.
I don't really know either. And so maybe we should just kind of park it there because we don't know
Well, I think
all the
it's not so
implications of
much
it.
like it's not like, well, maybe it's only 115 years. I mean, the point is that what we should take in is that each person affects the journey of the world. And that's big.
I'm just thinking about like the Christian view of the end of the world. You know, like Jesus is coming and he's going to judge who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. And it's such a different ideology to say, I have control over my own spiritual journey. I make the choices within my own mind as to how fast I'm going to get home or how delayed I'm going to be on this journey. And what I love about the course is that, I mean, in a long list of things, is are the determinants of how fast we get home. And we can delay our journey or we could speed up our journey. But at the end of the day, it's coming down to our choices.
Yeah, but our choices affect everyone. You know, the Course says about the sons of God, their influence on each other is without limit. When we make that choice to own that role, we affect the journey of the world. And whatever amount of years you put on that, I think is kind of irrelevant. The point is, we affect everyone. And we can't see that now, but it's still true.
Amazing idea
Yeah.
that those choices that we make within what we call our own mind are going out and affecting everything. Yeah, and we see that everywhere.
And think
Okay.
about I know we should go on, but think about Bill's class. He's supposed to inspire rather than dispirit and engender hope in these future therapists and teachers. Well, those are roles that reach other people. And then those other people reach still other people. So Bill, by teaching this class, is meant to start a chain reaction. And that gives you a sense of how us taking on our role can affect the journey of the world.
And it also goes to this idea of as a teacher, when you assume the role of a teacher, you feel that responsibility for other people. You feel that responsibility of having influence on the psyche of someone else. And I think we should have more of that feeling as teachers, to
Hmm.
be perfectly honest
Yeah.
with you. But
Yeah.
you don't have to be a teacher to understand that concept and to feel like your decision to go home faster has an impact on people that you know because of how you interact with them and people you don't know, the course says.
Right. Right.
So that's amazing that again all minds are joined and so our decisions affect everything. Okay.
The ripples keep going.
Right. So, going back to the idea that A Course in Miracles is not self study, the manual speaks of beginning students, finding teachers, and being mentored and learning the course from those teachers. And I've never loved that one on one process from an organizational level because it's very slow, and it doesn't scale very well. Um, I'm more of a let's get a big group of people in to learn the course together and then get that group out into the world, putting out the forest fire. That's how I'm built. Um, but there is something, you're always trying to bring me back to this one on one process because there's something to be said for the slower process of going deep into the course with a teacher. And as you're constantly reminding me, that's Jesus's model for learning the course. The manual for teachers is a teacher pupil relationship. And so let's talk about that idea.
There's so much to say, but yeah, this is an old conversation between us. I just want to say a few things in the time that we have. One is that this idea is in black and white in the manual. I don't know why no one talks about it. I don't know why no one seems to have noticed it. When we point it out, no one seems to particularly take notice even then, but it's discussed in black and white. New students of the course, finding teachers, working with them one-on-one to learn A Course in Miracles. And that is when you see the title Manual for Teachers, that's the main thing it has in mind, because that's what a teacher's manual in a normal course is. It's for a teacher who's teaching students in a particular course. So it's there. It's right there in the manual. And like it or not, it's not going to go away. So the other thing I want to say is you were talking about, going deep with the teacher. And the fact is the course is all about going deep. And we've been largely treating it as kind of a plaything, right? We just kind of bop around, we dip into that, then we dip into something else and dip into something else. Uh, the likelihood that you're just going to pick up the course all by yourself and really go deep with it is not very good. The way it's always worked for thousands of years around the world is if somebody wants to go deep spiritually, they're told to find a good teacher who has gone there ahead of them to some degree and can guide them there. And I think that it's notable. I mean, this is a very ancient system of teacher and disciple, right? Jesus had disciples. That this is true all over the world. And I just think it's very notable that the Course is stepping into that ancient pattern. And that's the only snapshot in the Course of people doing the Course together. There's no talk about, workshops or study groups, but there's lots of talk about a one-on-one relationship between a course teacher and a course pupil.
Well, that's the thing that we keep cycling around because there's a, and this is maybe just inside baseball of the circle, but we're trying to start a tradition of A Course in Miracles that spreads through the world. And in order to do that, as I was saying in the intro, you need a lot of people who are out there and dedicated to this work. And part of the problem that we have with the course is that it takes a really long time to learn. And so you've either got people who don't know what they're talking about, who are green as heck, and I put myself in this category as well when I first started. They're just eager and enthusiastic to share the course, but they're not studied in it. And so they just go out in the world and start sharing these ideas and they're spreading misinformation. And again, I did that myself. So I understand that. But then you've got this other side of it, because the course is so dense and it takes a while to learn. You can spend years and years and years with your nose in the book, not out there sharing it with the world. And these are both problems in their own way. And I don't have a solution other than what we're trying to do with the Miracle Ministry Academy and here at the Circle. We're very much trying to take people deep so that they could go out and be voices for the course in the world. But I do think it's worth naming this issue, that you don't want to get out there unlearned and just start sharing the course, but you also, I mean, we can't spend years and years. We don't have time. The world is burning. We don't have time to spend 10 years learning the course before you go out there and share anything. So,
Yeah, this is a whole thorny issue. I think we probably shouldn't try to sort it out here. I just think eventually, I mean, this is the system Jesus himself instituted. It's the main theme of the manual for teachers. At some point, we're going to have to get this going. And we've had attempts in the past, and they've been, pretty a mixed bag and not very successful and messy. And at some point, we'll have to kind of get back to that whole thing, but that's not right now.
yeah, for the meantime, I've settled into groups. Like groups are the thing
Yeah,
to get the course out into the
yeah.
world, pushing the groups. And you're always like pulling the thread of, but Jesus says it's
Well,
teacher
maybe we
pupil.
could just like re-edit the manual to be about groups.
Anyway, again, no real solution there, but I think it's worth naming.
Okay. Well, just to return to our topic, the positive side of the teacher pupil relationship you're talking about, takes a long time and doesn't scale and all. The
And it's
positive
messy.
side, it's messy. Yeah, I mean, even under good conditions, a lot of the pupils fired teachers. Um, so I mean, it is messy. But the manual says that both teacher and pupil bump each other ahead enormously in their spiritual development. So the pupil becomes a teacher. The manual says he who was the learner becomes a teacher of God himself, and the teacher becomes an advanced teacher. It says it's talking about the 10 characteristics of the advanced teacher of God. And it says they are, quote, born in the holy relationship toward which the teaching learning situation is geared, the relationship between teacher and learner. So both of them get bumped forward. And the manual recognizes there's a lot of failure along the way. It knows, if you look at section 3, it knows it's going to be messy and that few such relationships will fulfill their true potential. At the same time, when they work, both people, surge forward in their development.
Right. And we have to kind of generalize things here when we teach the course. So, for example, I just mentioned that when students need a teacher right where they are, and you're like, well, that's actually from the supplement on psychotherapy, but the idea applies to teacher student. And the same thing is true with the characteristics. We generalize them and say that these are the characteristics of the advanced student of the course. These are the characteristics that the course considers to be spiritually advanced. But those characteristics sit in the manual for teachers. And those characteristics are called characteristics of the advanced teachers of God. These are teacher characteristics born in the teacher student holy relationship. And so that's a bit of a nuance that we don't highlight all that much, but it's important, I think, for us to understand that this is how much significance the course places on the teacher pupil one-on-one relationship.
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing that out. Obviously, I love promotion of the whole teacher pupil idea. I also think it's interesting that those 10 characteristics, they paint a picture of an absolutely lovely, even saintly human being. And the impression you get is those characteristics aren't things necessarily that you like work on. You work on your trust and you work on your patience, although I would think you should. It acts like they will just kind of flower naturally out of the depth of that relationship with your pupil.
I love the course's relationship with hierarchy. Hierarchy is such a scary word in our world these days. And the course acknowledges a hierarchy. So it's not saying that we're all teachers and pupils of each other. It's saying that you have a teacher and you have a pupil So there is some hierarchy there, but that the role of the teacher is to bring the student up to their level of knowledge so that the student then goes on to become a teacher who then in turn brings students up to their knowledge. So the role of the hierarchy is to get rid of the hierarchy. So the teacher is always trying to make themselves, I always say irrelevant, but that's not the right word. What's the right word?
Obsolete.
Obsolete. And Jesus even says that about himself.
Yeah, the idea is the teacher's whole goal is to bring his or her pupils up to a level of equality, not the equality that God created in us, because that's always true, but equality in terms of ability, experience, understanding.
Beautiful
And
concept.
yeah, and the idea that you're always going to be above your pupils is of the ego.
Right. Okay. So this is a ready explanation for why people haven't experienced more change from the course. So if the teacher pupil relationship bumps the pupil ahead and bumps the teacher ahead, then what happens when those same two people never enter into a relationship? So this is obviously granting enormous significance to the role of the teacher. You told me that you did a study some time ago of the relationship between teachers and their pupils, which is referred to all over the course. And that study was, I think, really illuminating to you about why the role is so important. So, do you want to share what you learned from that study?
It really changed my picture of life, interestingly enough. And I looked at, those references to classroom teachers, those references to spiritual teachers, to role models, what you might call life teachers, like teachers that help you learn how to exercise good judgment, like as you're growing up. Um, and what I found interesting is that if you looked at all these different quotes, there was this pattern where the teacher, and he prefers the word pupil. He doesn't often use the word student. We like the word student, but he prefers pupil. A pupil is learning from someone. A student's just learning. And so the teacher in all these different quotes is taking the pupil along a way in life. It could be a way of life. And what I thought was that if there are so many instances where it's snapshots in the course where a teacher is leading a pupil along a way, then it just occurred to me that that must be how we largely get through life by leaning on teachers. And the more I thought about that, you know, people growing up, people learning a trade, people learning a career, people learning pretty much anything, people learning how to be. We're all kind of learning either on people who are teaching us directly or they're teaching us by example. We're watching them, even if they don't know we're watching them. We're all very social creatures. None of us invents the wheel by ourselves. We lean on people who have walked our way before us. And to think that that's how we get through life, which the more you think about it, I think the more obvious it becomes, that grants a huge significance to the role of teacher.
I know. And for as much pushback as I give you in terms of trying to scale all of this and do the group work, I have to admit two things. One is that Jesus talks about that teacher pupil relationship in the course. So you're right, it's right there in black and white. And I love this distinction about pupil. You're right. I mean, a student is someone who's just studying in general, but a pupil is someone who's learning from a teacher. So that's number one. Jesus says it. And number two is that if we all look at our own lives, if we just think back about to the people who have had the most influence on us, we can narrow it down to that one or two individuals who were teachers to us, who taught us something that we has changed us from the inside. I literally just had coffee with my first boss and mentor who I've known for 24 years now, and what he taught me was incredible. Just one man, right? And so I'm looking at my own life and thinking, oh, okay, it's the one on one relationship that has made a tremendous difference. And so, yeah, that's certainly what Jesus had in mind.
Well, I mean, and this is just true all across the board. We have teachers, whether they're formal teachers or informal teachers in life, where we wouldn't be the same, our lives wouldn't be the same, our career trajectory, our spiritual trajectory would be profoundly different if that person had never shown up in our lives.
And it's one to one. So
I
often the
think
most powerful.
that's the most powerful. Obviously, we learn from people. I've learned from people at a distance who, I hardly ever met. Um, but I think it's more powerful when you have that
Yeah.
one-to-one interaction.
Okay, so in the few minutes that we have remaining, let's talk about taking up our own role as teacher. We should say, first of all, that teaching does take many different forms. The course even says that. The course says teaching is done in many ways by formal means, by guidance, and above all, by example. And the course is very serious about, above all, by example. So let's talk about these different distinctions in the teaching role.
I think that it's a very short list of three things, but it's a great list. Obviously, formal means is about a formal teaching situation, like a classroom situation. Guidance, it clearly means giving someone counsel. And we give each other counsel all the time, right? An example is where you just watch someone and you learn from watching them, watching them live. Um, and yeah, the power of example, the power of demonstration is a theme that runs throughout the course, but let's not denigrate the other forms because the course is a formal teaching form, right? I mean, it's just words and words and words. Let's not underestimate the power of that, but let's realize that example is the most powerful way to teach.
Yeah, so just based on that, you can see why the course says that we are teaching all the time, even though we generally don't recognize that that's what we're doing. The course says this three different times. I'll give you a couple of quotes here. It says in chapter 6 that everyone teaches and teaches all the time. And in the manual, it says that teaching, quote, goes on every moment of the day and continues into sleeping thoughts as well. Continues into sleeping thoughts as well. So I don't know if you want to say more about that. It's an intriguing idea.
Well, I think what makes it so intriguing is it gives you the feeling you can't escape the act of teaching. It's so continuous that even while you're asleep and you're having those murky thoughts you have while asleep, um, you're still teaching. It's literally 24/7. It never lets up. There's never a second when you're not teaching. There never has been, there never will be. And basically, you wonder, well, like, how is that possible? I'm not sitting down and explaining to somebody how to do something every moment of the day, let alone while I'm asleep. And what the course is saying is that what we're really teaching is the fundamental premises by which we live. Another way to say that is we're teaching our basic thought system. And it's not a thought system about specifics. At one point, the course says, it sums it up as what you think you are and what you believe the relationship of others is to you. So everyone's got a belief system about what they are and what the relationship of others is to them. And they use every situation to teach that. They teach that in every breath, in every glance, and even in their sleeping thoughts. And I think once you put it that way, you're not teaching necessarily like woodworking or, basket weaving, or you're teaching those fundamental premises. It kind of makes sense that you can't get out of the act of teaching it.
Yeah, there's that line in the manual that says, from your demonstrations, others learn, and so do you. And I really wish that we had more of an understanding, and I'll put myself in this bucket as well, more of an understanding of the profound effect that we have on other people just as we're going through our lives, so often without even thinking about it. Just imagine all of the lessons that people have learned from us that we will never know. Maybe they're aware of it and never say it to us, and maybe they don't even know themselves what they've learned from just being around us and from our example. And I'm thinking also about, you watched the Sandra Bullock movie a while ago called 2 Weeks Notice, and in that movie she's talking about the difficult relationship that she has with her mom, and she has that line that you'll quote that says, for better or worse, she's the voice in my head pushing me to do better. And I think that that captures something about the importance of teachers. They live in our head and they can push us to do better or not.
Yeah, people, we internalize our teachers and they teach us after they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. Yeah. So, what the course is saying is we have this profound effect on other people through our teaching, but also on ourselves. And the course repeatedly says, as you teach, so shall you learn. Through what we demonstrate to others, through what we impart to them, we teach ourselves. Um, and so the course says in one place, teaching but reinforces what you believe about yourself. Its fundamental purpose is to diminish self-doubt. So that basic thought system that you live by, you teach it, you can't stop teaching it, and then through teaching it, you diminish your own doubt about it. And that's why the course says teaching is learning.
But he also says that learning is living here. So if learning is living and teaching is learning, then it's safe to say that teaching is living here. To
Yeah.
live is to teach and thereby to learn. So, yeah, there's just so much more here on the role of teachers, the importance of teachers, the value of teachers, what to look for in a teacher, how to embody the course's ideals and principles of teaching. So I wish we had more time, but we're at the top of the hour now. So I don't know if you want to say anything in closing or just leave it there.
Just that it's a hugely consequential role. We're in it already and don't know it. We all have a calling to take up that role and be, contribute to the salvation of the world in some form. It can be formal teaching, it can be in informal ways, it can be through our demonstration. But when we take up our assigned role, we change the journey of many people and they change the journey of others. The ripples keep going and we change our own journey. We learn in ways we would never learn except through our teaching. So rather than kind of denigrating and marginalizing this role, we need, I think, to really embrace it and realize how much a part of the fabric of life it is and how much a part of the fabric of our homecoming it is.
And I think that there's this attitude that we should cultivate around teaching. I think we don't consider ourselves teachers by and large, but when you think about the influence that you have on other people and this idea that we just talked about, that you're actually teaching all the time, the question is, what are you teaching? I feel the effect of that in my role as a parent. I'm constantly asking, like, what am I teaching my children through my behavior? And I definitely feel that in the role that we have here at the circle, where I'm thinking, okay, the North Star is always to get to the loving and forgiving place. And so, regardless of what's going on internally right now, how do I find that place? How do I find my way through to that place? And but for placing a value on the role of teaching, it conditions my mind to just think, what effect am I having on others? And you don't have to be in a formal teaching role to have that thought. What effect am I having right now on others? And as we've been saying, this not only includes others who are in your immediate orbit, the work that you do is affecting others, the minds of others that you can't imagine on the other side of the world. Um, it past and future in time, the course says. So it's big. It's big, the project, the progress that we make.
And the effect we have on them ultimately is the effect we have on ourselves.
Yeah.
So if we're reinforcing something, that's of the ego in them, we reinforce our own ego.
Okay, well, we will leave it there. Thank you so much to all who are watching or listening to this podcast. If you'd like to join us for a future episode of Exploring A Course in Miracles live, you're welcome to visit our free online community at community.circleofa.org. And if you are feeling the call to dedicate your life to teaching or sharing A Course in Miracles in some way as your full-time career, we hope that you'll join us in the Miracle Ministry Academy, which again, you can find the application for at circleofa.org/MMA. On behalf of Robert and I and everyone here at the Circle, thank you so much for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.